Hello, and welcome back, everyone, for the second panel for day 2 of A Weekend with Good Friends. This topic is quite an interesting one, which is drawing inspiration from the natural world. And with me, I have fantastic guests: Graeme Patrick, Heather Miller, Sue Savage, and T.A. Newman. Before we begin directly and talk about biology, physics, and spooky sciences, I want you to give a short introduction and where people can find you. And yeah, let's start with Sue today.
That rather took me by surprise. Yeah, I'm Sue Savage. You can find me in various places on the internet under the name Savage Spiel. That currently includes Blue Sky and my blog on blogspot.com. I also write a bunch of scenarios for the game Liminal, plus my own game, and you can find all of those on DriveThruRPG.
Fantastic. What about T.A. Newman?
Hello, I am T.A. Newman. I'm the host of the Miskatonic Playhouse, where we play scenarios, a lot of community scenarios. You can find me on pretty much all the socials as T.A. Newman, or just get in touch with the Miskatonic Playhouse. I'm always hanging out in the Discord there. So, yeah, see you there.
Fantastic. Heather, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Miller. Professionally, I'm a medical writer with the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. In the world of Lovecraft, I have a book coming out this summer through Hippocampus Press called Ripples from Carcosa, H.P. Lovecraft, Haunted Landscapes, and True Detective. You could find me pretty quickly on Discord under Minson 98, and that's where I am everywhere else for a very long time on the internet. So thanks.
Fantastic. And Graeme Patrick.
Hello, I'm Graeme Patrick. I write scenarios. I've done about 20 or so, various stages of publishing. I run RPG Unit, which rips scenarios apart and puts them back together again, looking at what they makes them tick. And I write for Ain't Slayed Nobody as well. I'm found in most Discord, I think, these days. You can probably find me there.
Fantastic. I'm David, and I will be moderating today. And to start us off, I want to ask a simple question, which is: do you have any aspects of the natural world that can be either beautiful or terrifying that you might have used in scenario creation, running games, or that were just inspirational when writing?
I'm happy to kick off with a low level example. For my first scenario, was inspired by a natural environment, but also a man-made structure. On that, I live in the southwest of England, so right on the coast in the middle of nowhere, but near us. So we get to do all the beach stuff, which is wicked. But we actually have Dartmoor. Very close to us, which is a incredibly infamous location. It's Sherlock Holmes' Hound of the Baskervilles for its fame. It is a beautiful and very desolate location, and it's desolate for a reason. Sometimes my friends try and take me up for a run up there, and you realise why it's so desolate. It's such a beautiful but really dangerous and uninviting landscape. There was a prison built there. There is a prison built there, Dartmoor Prison, and it was built for that reason, to be in a location that it was almost mentally breaking for the prisoners to be taken there. Apart from the small town of Princetown, which is near it and has evolved over the years, it was the idea that you are in a prison and your prison is in the middle of nowhere. So if you escape this horrific prison, or brilliant prison, depending on your viewpoint, you've got nowhere to go. You've got miles and miles and miles and miles of scree slopes, scrags, cliff ends. It is a very challenging environment. And I think that getting into writing, that was one of the first real kind of inspirations from the natural world that I had, that I got really excited about. And it became almost a character in itself.
Fantastic. Sue?
Yep. So I spent a lot of my childhood on walking holidays with my parents. So I've spent a quite a lot of time in North Wales, walking around the area formerly known as Snowdonia. I think it's now Earwiffer. And some Welsh person will probably tell me how I pronounced that wrong, but at least I'm trying. Anyway, the landscape up there is heavily shaped by glaciation, so you get a lot of knife-edge ridges on the north sides of the mountains, and these are absolutely terrifying things to walk up. And naturally, if you have hill walkers for parents, they are going to drag you up there when you're 10 years old and have just got your first pair of walking boots. And it's a very, very long way down. But yeah, these are established walking routes. You're going to get a whole bunch of people walking up and down them, which does occasionally mean you have to walk past people. And just, yeah, that's really my first experience of what heights look like. And obviously a bit further down the mountain, you're going to get things like waterfalls. And if you never stood near the base of a waterfall, then I thoroughly recommend it. It is incredibly loud, just blocks off pretty much every other sound because it's that kind of grey noise. And you also get the feeling of the water pressure, and just it's a scary thought to imagine what would happen if you fell in, just the sheer pressure of water coming down from above. And so I have put waterfalls and mountains into some of my scenarios just because it's such a scary and yet beautiful thing.
Fantastic. What about you, Graeme?
Ooh, well, going back to one of the first scenarios I ever wrote was keep harping on about fever because it's I suppose I spent most time on it. I think I spent about a year planning it out and writing it. It's about going to California from the east, the sort of like 49ers traveling across the sort of newly trailblazed route of the Carson Trail, which takes you through the 40-mile desert in Nevada, and it's the sheer harshness of the sort of bleak, beautiful landscape. You've got all these sort of like animals which are trudging through this sort of harsh environment, desperate for water, but there's water all about. It's all saline water. That to drink it is just death, and it's quite harrowing survival to get through that sort of environment. And I ended up reading a lot of geology about the Sierra Mountains, and I started adding sort of like xenoliths, sort of small like stone elements into the story about the geology and how the sort of these sort of nuggets of older stone that have been embedded in the sort of fresher stone that's come up through the generations of the formation of the Sierra Mountains, and how these hold like mycelial like microbes that sort of make up a sort of larger mycelial network, which is actually a sort of Noah's Ark that sort of takes in information and then destroys the world to reset it. And you can join this arc and go through this whole journey of apocalypse with this sort of like entity, and it will like breed you back out into the world and as like a mushroom, I guess, a sort of flowering body, that sort of thing. And there's so I used a lot of nature for that and a lot of geology and that sort of thing. It was like you have to, so yeah, I do look at nature a lot in most of my scenarios.
Okay. Just a general content warning that we want to put out for an inspirational blog that Heather Miller provided for her inspiration. That can go into body horror, so view with caution, I want to say. We'll post a link directly in the chat, but it will be available afterwards in the description as well. Heather, what about you? Where does your inspiration from nature come from?
So I grew up outside of New Orleans. So in addition to being it claims to be one of the most haunted cities, globally, because of its history, it's also on an interesting sort of geological area. Just outside of the city and its suburbs, there are all the beginnings of the swamps. And so there's all kinds of things going on in a swamp There's all kinds of animals. There's all kinds of conflict. There's all kinds of things that humans are putting in the swamp that are damaging the swamp and could potentially cause, an eldritch uprising maybe at one point. So there's that. There's this, because it's a place that's on the edge, on the borderline, there's all kinds of ways to introduce things ebbing back and forth between the two, and new things that can be created out of that. I grew up, I was of the generation, I'm a Gen Xer. I grew up playing outside unsupervised. And so, playing in my neighborhood, in creeks and in the woods and all of that. So for some people, there's just really simple things to introduce from my experience with that were nothing, walking through a creek and suddenly stepping on something that moved and ran away. That was commonplace. But some people, for the right set of players, that introduces the terror. And, I try to gauge my experiences and the things I grew up around to fit the expectations of whichever group it is that I have at the table. So yeah, all kinds of things of man-meeting nature that I can bring in.
Okay. Just for the audience, if you have any questions that you want to direct to our panelist, please provide them in our YouTube chat, and we'll try to get to them as soon as we can. When you choose elements of nature, what is it that kind of you draw upon first? And is there maybe a way of capturing the nature aspect in a specific way? Do you take pictures, notes? Is it more out of memory? What is your process when you kind of capture these elements of nature?
Well, for me, I think it kind of depends on, am I trying to come up with an opponent of some kind that maybe my players have never seen before? Or am I trying to evoke an atmosphere? Because if I'm trying to evoke an atmosphere, then that's one direction I'll go. It'll be a broader in scope. But if I'm trying to create a new kind of creature, then I can go down, and this is in the blog that I posted, I can go down to the microbe level, take that idea and resize it into something much larger, keep those same characteristics. And now you've got this new monster that nobody's ever seen before. And here it is. Now what are you going to do?
Yeah, I think your environment informs your choices, really. Form follows function, really, when it comes to these things. Like, I always pick settings or squirrel away like articles that I find interesting. Like, one that I want to use is that they found microbes that they were thinking about lining spaceships with to eat the radiation and seal the doors properly and that sort of thing. It's a very like invocative thought of them trusting that to this microbe that could be easily changed by the radiation and sort of like burst out, and the whole ship becomes almost sentient or something like that. Or you have problems start eating through the hull and start forming in the corridors. You've got to send out fire teams to sort of fight it back and all these sort of things. Or even using it for like 3D printing. 3D printing like body parts now is quite the thing, and you can go down all that sort of route. What's the basis of that? What we're doing with it? Just hoard science articles or science news that you like, and like once you find something that is compelling and it sort of links to another one, you smash two ideas together and you get sort of the premise for your new scenario. It's how I usually do go about it, unless I'm looking at a particular place in the world or trying to subvert sort of expectations. It's like, I have a scenario where I use ghouls in a cave, and I'm talking about caves, that sort of thing. I always, it's one of these things you always go back to, try not to use them, but I do have it. And
Brackish cave.
Yeah, it's ghouls in a cave. Oh wow, what's new about that? But I have these insects. I was looking at ants, and there's a sort of a breed of ant called slaver ants, which go into other colonies and steal sort of like other ants. They can't do anything for themselves. All they can do is make friends with other ants, steal their eggs, and bring them back and start their own nest. It's bizarre, and they even fight each other. So if the nest gets taken over by slaver ants, they'll fight each other about who gets to steal what from who. So I had this idea of having a sort of like an entity from the sort of the shadow desert that's come through worship from these ghouls, and they're actually taking over the ghoul colony by like sort of almost like treating them as slaves, sort of like using them as chattel. So they've got humans and ghouls in that cave, sort of like working together under the sort of guise of this other malevolence that is even worse than the ghouls themselves. So yeah, it comes together. These ideas sort of click, but just keep these articles, you know.
That's cool. I like the. I mean, obviously, it's something we'll go on to, but the nature's behavior, right? Yeah, rather than just nature itself and playing with that. That's really lovely. I think, David, what was the crux of the question again? Because I know what I want to say. I just want to make sure I answer your question because I know what I'm like.
Basically, if there are any tips or tricks that how you capture nature for your scenario.
How you capture nature. So I don't, like some people in this panel, have a degree or PhD in being super clever. Unfortunately, I went to a different school. But what I do have is wonderful environments around me, and I feel like, you know, being told from quite a young age in regard to writing, you know, the kind of write what you know. I am very lucky where I live, and I do have access to some wonderful areas, and I think it's kind of resplendent in my writing, and I suppose in reflection, I'm kind of like, wow, actually, it's blatant in my writing. But going forward, I think, you know, all this talk of micro organisms, and, you know, I think this is a really, really cool direction to go in. But if I think about my first few scenarios, like way back when, Dartmoor, small village in the southwest countryside. Twice actually, because it was the same village, so there were some reoccurring NPCs for the point of, you know, continuation of narrative. Even the big campaign book that is still currently with the editor in the works, Regency book, Cult and Culpability, because of the popularity of Regency locations, you know, bathhouses were hugely popular, and I live by the coast, so it does there is a fictional town, almost like a sandboxy town, that people can play with from the campaign book, which is a fictional town that is created, supposed to be just down the road from where I live, but that offers in itself areas like Dartmoor, wonderful, you know, green fields and forests, but also you've got this seaside town, you've got the beach, you've got the ocean, and they all offer things in themselves. And I think capturing that, it's because I live here and I feel confident in doing that. But saying that, having recently trotted out to Heather's childhood stomping ground and a wonderful trip to New Orleans, yes, the environment out there is next level. You can see why so many people set scenarios in locations like this, not just because they're popular and they're well known, but because they, and obviously, yeah, we went on the Mississippi in a steamboat, and that was all wonderful in itself. And the Mississippi is wonderful, and Heather's probably going to shoot me some laser eyes now. But the Mississippi is a river. You know, you kind of look at it and go, okay, it's the Mississippi. What's interesting is the environment around it. And I think there was still areas further down the Mississippi on the tour that you could see where Katrina had impacted, and they were in parts of devastation, and it wasn't just human built structures that were devastated, it was the natural environment as well. So, you know, I think that is really kind of interesting, is going out to an environment or culture that's not your own and just kind of absorbing it and soaking it up and going, wow, okay, this is interesting. I'm comfortable with my own. I think the challenge after this panel is to immediately book tickets to somewhere like Alaska and go and check it out and see what the environment's like. I heard it's warm this time of year.
One of the interesting things about, you bring up Katrina, but a natural event, a natural disaster like Katrina or an earthquake or something like that could potentially reveal something something horrific, something of cosmic horror, something eldritch that the investigators stumble across, that they're told to go look at, any of that. And that's a blank slate for you. You know, you could put anything in there.
I think the revelation. Sorry, Sue. No, go on.
I was going to say when I'm looking to nature for inspiration, it's usually because I'm writing an alien scenario. Alien being the classic body horror experience, and I think some people make the mistake with Alien of thinking that the xenomorph is the villain. No, Weyland-Yutani is the villain. It's their attempt to weaponize nature that is the key to a fun alien scenario. So I'm always looking for weird things in nature and then thinking, how could Weyland-Yutani really mess this up? So I think
Weyland-Yutani do?
Yeah, my primary source is stuff like David Attenborough, because I'm of an age to have grown up watching his stuff. I've still got some of the books on the shelves, and he just went around the world finding the weirdest bits of nature and then making documentaries and books about them. So they're BBC shows, so they should all be out there still. So yeah, look those up. And so alternatively, YouTube is out there, and there are so many YouTubers making top 10 weirdest whatevers list articles. And even if they're not completely accurate, if you're doing it for a scenario, it doesn't necessarily matter. So like the most recent alien scenario I wrote, my primary inspiration was vulture bees. And they're bees that they don't feed on nectar like typical bees. They eat meat. And they make meat honey. And the moment I read that, I thought there's a scenario in there.
Yeah. I was going
to
to
half written. The scenario is half written just by that one phrase.
Yeah, and then I just combined it with parasitic wasps, and that was most of the scenario done.
Yeah. I always thought Alien is like a very difficult one to write scenarios for, because it's usually telling one story over and over again, I found. So it's interesting to say that. Is that how you try and keep it fresh, by changing up the aliens or the local fauna?
Yeah, okay. I mean, my scenarios don't generally have xenomorphs, but they're going to have some weird nature.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, one of my favorite things to talk to people about. You want to talk about weird body things? This isn't really going into body horror. I don't guess. So I usually ask them, so you know how the human body likes to make rocks inside of itself? Because it does. You know, our bodies make rocks. And it's not just in our gallbladders, and it's not just in our kidneys. Your body can calcify all over your insides and your outsides. You can get calcifications in your heart tissue, if that isn't a scary thought. But you can get them in your tonsils. They're called tonsil stones, and they're technically not really stones. But the pictures of those are top notch. I'll put it that way. They're top notch. And if you're aversive to body horror, don't go looking these up. But yeah, you know, there's nature transforms things in ways we aren't always aware of or haven't really thought of. And when you just start that basic research on what might be going on, or with an idea, you may well find that there's something already sitting out there in nature that you can that's done a lot of the work for you. You could just pull it in and go with it. So this idea of calcifications in the human body, you know, calcifications are how men get breast cancer, for instance. That's where it starts, is calcifications in male breast tissue. So that it's there, it's right there. And you've got this idea of rocks growing inside the human body. There's all kinds of directions you can go with that.
Yeah, I remember visiting a cave in Wales, actually, that calcified like things which were hung from it, from like a cave waterfall. I'm not, maybe Sue knows about that.
Yeah.
I can't remember where it was, but it was always fascinating me as a child, and scared the living crap out of me that these things are now stone and just hanging there, like transmogrified. And that's like, that must have been like 4 or something when I went down to see that.
Yeah, I saw that on a TV show recently. I think they're hanging up objects in the water just to make them petrify. Well, it's not quite petrify, but
Ossify, I guess you'd call it.
Yeah. I think it's linked to the Fountain of Life as well. Some sort of like myth about that too. I need to look it out. I always forget all about it, and I think I should use that on something, but never do.
Especially with that childhood kind of impact, that's gonna create some. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I like the idea of people becoming sculptures and in the garden sort of thing. Sort of playing around with that idea. I too try to use that imagery a decent amount.
Are there specific kind of areas of nature that you often like to go back to, like biology or like waterfalls, and maybe the forces of nature, as we said earlier about destructive forces like Katrina, hurricanes, and they're like that you really find good inspiration for maybe cosmic horror, as Heather said earlier, or you just you go based on the scenario, right? Or you find inspiration throughout. Let's put it this way.
I like manipulating nature so that there's it's the same. Yeah, I mean, this is a trick you could use with anything. It doesn't have to be nature, but I think nature is such a wonderful vehicle for it, that you present it in a way that it doesn't work in the way that you expect. So there's a whole experience, and it was kind of playing with dreams really to allow it, but in Cult and Culpability there's this whole experience where the characters, the investigators, essentially are in a joined dream. Now, it's not explicitly the dreamlands or anything like that, but it is this shared experience. And because a lot of the action is by the ocean, by the water's a key feature, we kind of did it that there's this created this almost a tea party, but you're in just this endless blackless void, but the floor is the surface of water. So wherever you step, there's ripples, it's sounds, there's no walls. It's just and so the removal of nature, the removal of what the players would expect, but then just focusing on that one unique but not natural formation of nature. And obviously depending on roles and the experiences of the characters, I think at one point one of our characters did actually go through the floor, through the water floor. So it wasn't, it was down to a series of choices, and it was such a unique, bizarre experience that the investigators were sitting at a tea party hosted by a dead relative in a void, and the floor was essentially black water, and it was one, the light was limited. And I think those things, those removal of sensory expectations as well, in regards to what we expect nature to be, what we assume, what we just rely on without even thinking about it, the removal of those aspects, those natural aspects, really added to heightening something. I remember having a lot of fun with that in terms of thinking about what are the natural world consequences of doing this? How do the investigators actually interact with it? How do they engage it? Or is it just going to be, something that sounds in my head really cool, but when it's actually done, is it going to be something that just doesn't come off? That was the other thing when twisting nature in that way. How is it going to be communicated?
Yeah. I'll jump in here if no one else wants to talk. I kind of did something similar, Newman, actually, with Eight Slade, Nobody, and Bleaker Trails. I had two warring archaeology factions fighting over El Capitan, and they basically have this sort of like surreal experience with dreams, and they sort of manifest in reality, and basically the mountains basically belch out like this ancient ocean, because that range of mountains is old, like coral reefs, basically like the barrier reef that's back in the day. That's why there's a lot of oil in Texas, because there's all these sort of like sort of repositories of dead like oceans, basically. So I quite like this idea of this dead ocean being rejuvenated into being back into sort of reality. So there's all this sort of like cascade of like sea floor being thrown down the mountain, and they have to like trudge through it, and bobbit ones will come up and try and pull them down into it and things like that. Exploding sort of rotting animals that are exposed to the sun, and eventually they start getting into the dream itself, and they start to manifest around it. there was the Love, Sex, Robot, Death episode with the guys on that was kind of the inspiration for it, where they've seen the sort of fish ghosts in the desert.
I remember. Yeah.
So
the two guys that got in the car.
Yeah,
I remember.
That's from an old short story as well, which is partly about cowboys. I need to look out. Scott was talking about it, and they sort of manifest into this ocean, sort of drowning the ocean. They got to get back out, and then that's how they enter the dreamland sort of thing, because they're going through the ocean into the new world sort of thing, and they have to figure out a way how to get out, basically.
I love that. I love that reversal of nature, that almost like the wheels turning backwards on nature's kind of processes, that regurgitation of the dead ocean, bringing it back to life. I love that. That's a very cool idea.
Thanks.
If you haven't listened to Bleaker Trails, you got to listen to it.
I have, but I've only got so far.
Well, there's something really funny that happens to Bridget Jeffries' character that nobody is letting her forget about.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So can you remind us how we find that, so we can all go and watch it later?
It's nobody.com. There'll be plenty of links in that. Or we can hit the Discords. You'll be able to find it there as well.
Fantastic. I just wanted. I just maybe chime in briefly because I often also realized in the past we just moved to like the countryside here in Croatia, and we go usually on a walk at different times of the day, and so there's this one old shabby building kind of in the middle of a empty field, and it's so inspiring sometimes to see like the different atmospheres around it, when it's morning, when it's daylight, when it's dawn, how just like these leaves, the ivies that it's overgrown into the building has transformed that nice setting when it's sunshine to an eerie murder shack. And it's a fantastic source of inspiration, I find. Just taking a walk once a day and just kind of open your eyes to nature, like leave your phone at home and just look around you, as it's truly, I think, atmosphere is highly influenced by not only what you see but also what kind of the environment around you does, and when you kind of encounter it. Because a murder shack can be like an old decrepit house at day, but at night it becomes a creepy, scary situation where you might consider twice to enter it. Are there any specific kind of moments that you kind of recall in the past where you saw something in nature that immediately kind of made you kind of scream a bit, that kept into your mind?
I remember being a kid on holiday in Malta, much like Sue's parents, but my parents were more like, here's a historical place we want to go and experience and drag our children to. But I remember being in Malta, and for some reason, I just remember this one. Firstly, there was a weird thing where there was no birds in the sky, and it was because the locals used to shoot the birds, but there was no birds in the sky whatsoever. I don't know whether that was that small, bizarre town or whether that's a local thing. I'm sure it was just a localized unique thing, but with the sky being so clear and it really was like clear skies, I just remember this most unique lightning storm as a kid as well. That's a big deal, different country, big lightning storm, and I just remember the sound. Don't remember it being like anything we have in the UK, and I've even been in America when there's been tropical storms and things. I think the being in Florida and having a tropical storm and the news telling us to go and sit in bathtubs and things, the idea of that was it was just chaos. It was madness. It was full on. It was almost like, an act of a higher power, But this thing in Malta, it was so bizarre because you'd be sitting out on your balcony and it was almost like the rest of the world was just super calm. But then these like streaks of lightning and the just singular crack, it wasn't like the echoed thunder. I've only just remembered that, David. Thank you for bringing that back to me. What What a bizarre memory. Yeah, I remember that. I also remember having this little Pluto toy from Disney and losing it on the beach and being really sad. Thanks, David.
I have a very similar memory to that when we were like caught in a lightning storm. We were staying in Kissimmee and we were in the pool and we were like got dragged out the pool before the lightning was striking that. And what I remember is the smell of the storm when it hits the hot pavements and starts to hiss. That's very sort of like memorable sort of like notion. And we were dragged inside and everyone was running around. Yeah.
Yeah, scent is a really good idea. The scent of ozone before, I don't know if anybody else can smell it, but I can smell rain when it's about to, when a storm is coming, I can pick up the scent in the air. And yeah, being able to use things like that as foreshadowing for something. If a creature that you've come up with has a particular scent, like, rotting gardenias or, something that is, I try to blend something that is nice with something that is not nice. So it's a rotting flower smell or something like that, not just a rotting corpse, because there's rotting corpses everywhere in Call of Cthulhu. They're all over the place. But less so other things. So yeah, try to make that blend.
What about you, Sue?
Yeah, I'm thinking of something that's kind of the opposite, really. I'm thinking about climbing those mountains in Wales again. You get to a point where there's no more trees because you're too high up for trees to grow. And a while after that, you hit the cloud line. And once you're into the clouds, your visibility is pretty much gone. You're completely dependent on being able to follow the worn path that people have left for you before, and your own skill with your map and compass. These days, I guess there's GPS navigators, but we didn't have those back in the 80s and 90s. And yeah, so your vision is very, very minimal because you're literally inside a cloud. Hearing's also pretty bad because you get almost constant wind up there, and it's just roaring in your ears. The physical.
Surely you're just hearing your heartbeat by that point as well.
Yeah, and so the physical sensation is pretty unpleasant. Clouds are wet. They're wet in an unpleasant way that you just don't experience anywhere else. And also because of the way the wind hits the mountain and then starts going up, it drives the wet and the rain all up underneath your waterproof, so it's all getting into your clothes. It's just an incredibly unpleasant experience where either your senses are being overstimulated or just taken away completely. And really wondering why I did it so much on holidays.
Yeah, this was for pleasure.
Yeah, and so again, you come past a point where a lot of the climb you've got grass at least, but then there comes a point where there's not even grass and it's just rocks the rest of the way up.
Have you used that surreal vastness in a scenario? The sort of like being this small dot in a huge expanse?
Yeah, I don't think I have, and I really need to. I have used the mist experience of being up in that environment where your vision has been taken away and the wind is stealing the sound.
Yeah,
Sue, go on, Gray.
It was just reminding me of a short story. I can't remember the guy's name. He wrote the Bulls trilogy. It's on the tip of my tongue, but I can't remember. He wrote a short story about a guy who was obsessed with climbing this alien mountain, and all the other people were trying to get to the top as well, unaided, and how his body was just getting deteriorated and losing fingers. And by the time of it, he's retelling the story, but he's like half the man he was, literally, by the end of it. But when he gets to the top and almost dies from that sort of like the journey and almost like lack of oxygen, all that sort of thing. It's quite a compelling thing to use.
Yeah. Sue, maybe it's a Midlands Wales thing. I grew up in Shrewsbury and my mum's Welsh, so we kind of spent a lot of time doing the similar thing. I always remember Tryfan as a mountain. It kind of like gets to the point, and having a mate take me climbing up it, and then realizing once we got to the top that the other side you can just casually walk down it, and it was just like, oh, nice one, mate. But the weird thing is, you talking about those clouds and the mist and walking in it, isn't it so weird when you're in that environment and you're void of anything what you'd expect, but then you come across one of those cairns, like all the rocks humanly built up, but they're still a natural, obviously they're rocks, but humans have built them up. And I find that actually quite weird because other people have been there, they've set up these cairns as a guidance system, but at the same time, no one's there. And it is, I find that quite a haunting thing. You can kind of get away with being in the surrounded and almost kind of swallowed up by nature, but then when you see one of those, I know they're supposed to help, but it actually, for me, it's like the other thing. I'm like, oh, don't like that.
Did they put it up as a warning, or did they put it up as a guideline?
Yeah.
No, that was the sign next to it that said, huge sign, do not cross. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know when you're up there, what they're there for is pretty much when you're in the cloud and your visibility is limited, you can look for the cairns to show you where the path is going. They say the most incongruous thing you'll find up a mountain is probably Snowdon itself, where you'll find a railway station. Yeah, there's a station and a cafe.
Interesting.
Yeah, I've been up there once on the train, and that was a fun trip. It's worth doing if you don't fancy climbing the mountain yourself.
So that's quite a nice angle. Is taking a human-made mode of transport and forcing it into a natural environment that it shouldn't really belong in.
It's the whole Wild West.
Mhm.
Hey, quite right.
That's why I like it so much. It's that confrontation of nature and society clashing together, and it's doing it at such a massive pace. It's like you can always have the maps of the old trails, and then the maps of the old railways, and they match pretty much on track. And them old tracks are just animal tracks that the sort of locals have been using as well. It's like it's the path of least resistance through nature. That tends to be the sort of the highways of humans to expand. Yeah. Have either of you seen Empty Man? The start of Empty Man? That's what this is sort of reminding me of. That sort of like
yeah. That's a wonderful intro as well. It's a great kind of 10-15 minute segment. Yeah. Oh, that's a recommendation. I'll put that in the chat. If you haven't seen it, anybody listening, The Empty Man.
It's a great film.
Yeah.
I certainly need to look that up. Is there, I think, well, what I kind of want to steer to is a bit the unexplored part of nature. I mean, we have deserts, we have mountains, we have flora and fauna, and then we have pretty much the most unexplored territory of the world, which is deep sea. Absolute darkness. We know more about space than we know what is basically 6 miles down the road on our own planet. And I'm just starting to play in a modern day campaign that is focusing on like deep sea exploration. And we were just doing session 0 and the first session, and it was very, very inspiring. I was starting to already to kind of do some research, and our GM pulled up all the material, and I was like, yeah, that's pretty terrifying. And now I'm going to do a Call of Cthulhu campaign, and I'm going down in the blackness of pressure, and if a screw pops out, I might die. Like, yeah, it's becoming a terrifying environment. Is there any specific elements or terrain, let's put it this way, that you really like to utilize, or maybe would like to use more?
I use the ocean a lot, so I'll let other people answer before I get into this.
I always remember a fact, quite a significant fact. I don't usually like remembering how right my dad can be sometimes, but I always remember him saying something like, when you look up at the night sky, from what you can see with your naked eye, as a species, we have the ability to monitor, I think it's like 3 to 5% of what we can actually see. And then the revealing fact is that we actually know more about space than we do about our own oceans. So in regard to what you can see and what we can monitor, and then the reality of the ocean, it is quite a terrifying reality that for our own planet, that we don't know, we haven't explored, we haven't accessed what's down there. And I'm sure obviously that statistic has changed in the last decade, but yeah, quite terrifying.
One of the interesting things that we're learning about microbes specifically in the ocean is that there are so many that are not don't use oxygen to power their cells, basically. There's some that use metals. There's one that uses iron. There are several that use sulfur. So, if you're sort of more scientifically inclined, you could take that as a basis to develop a new kind of monster or augment a current monster that you have in maybe a deep sea scenario that you're developing. And this is the ocean is another perfect place to get an image of a microbe, expand it, and turn it into your next big bad evil guy. There's many different kinds, shapes. On the blog, I've got an image of a nematode. I mean, it came out of a South African mine, and it's a micro image because it's such a small nematode, but it looks like it's underwater, and it looks like it's this huge creature surrounded by other terrible things. Yeah, there's a ton of things to draw on.
So a good example of drawing on stuff from the sea is the story of Equoid by Charlie Stross. It's part of the Laundry Files series, and his inspiration for it came from when he was at a convention and he'd just been reading a lot of notes someone had got for him on sexual dimorphism in anglerfish. And then I think it was John Scalzi who was busily talking to an editor about some idea he'd had, and no way to put this delicately. He used the words unicorn bukkake.
Oh no.
And apparently that spurred something in Charlie Stross's mind, and Equoid was the result. And so obviously it's, on the face of it, it's about unicorns, but underneath it's about sexual dimorphism in anglerfish and also cone snails. There are so many terrifying things on beaches that you could just step on and then die.
Mm-hmm.
I think the ocean it's just inherently, in terms of how it's, I suppose, overall perception is. I know some, like, where I live, loads of mates, big surfers, they spend their life in the bloody ocean. I love going out there, love having a surf and stuff, but I will look at deep, dark waters beneath my feet if I'm sitting on a board and occasionally go, wonder what's. And I think, obviously, throughout the history of, well, our ability to try and transport, as well, across oceans and things, obviously we don't necessarily sit down and record all of the successes because there'd be too many, but we do, in the zeitgeist of human news, we do publicize and make a huge deal of things when things go wrong. So those are big, whether it be the Titanic or whether it be, sadly in the not too distant past, a personal kind of submariner mission. There are so many things. Even if we looked at the Bermuda Triangle, which I know again has gone massively into the tomes of mythos and just general kind of conspiracies and things. There's the Red Dragon Triangle as well, I believe, which is out closer towards China and things. There are these areas that I think sit in your mind, don't they, as these terrifying things. And then, you've got people like Steven Spielberg making Jaws. There is nature being, even before we think about making it mythos altered. It's a scary thing, can be a really scary thing. It's the most beautiful thing, but is also, incredibly scary. And we talk about Cthulhu and how the investigators are just kind of squishy little people with small brains, and that's their kind of tragic fate, unfortunately. But that's also, comparison against nature as well. We are squishy little things, and nature doesn't care if we get in the way.
Super.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually written a scenario which I actually just forgot about until you mentioned this, that I've not touched it in about 2 years, about Challenger Deep and sort of the relocation of this sort of oil rig research center over Challenger Reach. And it's got like almost this sort of elevator down to a research station deep in the ocean, and there's like basically an activist blows it up when you're on tour to this thing, and the whole thing sinks, and it's getting dragged off the sea ledge into the Challenger Deep. And it's all about the sort of they're trying to basically come up with new scientific medical research for saving humans, and sort of like the chase for immortality, really using sort of like these sea sponges that they found down there. And it's all about the mad research, and it's about this doctor's daughter, who's basically kept in an iron lung, and he's basically trying to save her. And she's actually living in the Challenger Deep as this creature now, because he's thrown her in there because he just can't deal with her anymore because she's changed so much. And you're basically getting dragged down to where she is, down in that hole, and you have to. There's a. They did it for the Abyss. Have you ever seen the documentaries on Abyss, where
Yeah.
they take the rats and drown them, but they're fine. They can actually breathe the water. It was kind of based on that sort of aspect. You have to basically use the lab and go around the sort of station as it's sinking to create these sort of like to use these sort of experimental suits where you breathe the water. So you can go outside and get back up to the surface, basically. So it's a big sort of like challenge. There's only 2 suits, but there's 5 of you, sort of thing, and you've got to go through all this labs. And there's these things outside along with the daughter, and you can basically evolve using these things into sort of like jellyfish people almost out in the ocean. It's I love that sort of stuff. I've kept fish for most of my life, basically tropical fish and marine fish, and I've got a big fascination with sort of that sort of area things. So yeah, it's I need to probably revisit that.
Yeah, that sounds wicked.
It's weird. It's very science heavy, which is one of the reasons that I kind of left it. I think it was too big for me at the time when I was trying to write it. One of my friends is a scuba diver. He's terrified of the ocean, but he's a certified scuba diver. He has this. He hates going down, sort of thing. And we're talking about how the body can actually. It doesn't get depressed too much the further you go down, because most of your body's water anyway. It's only things like like cartilage and stuff like that gonna get fucked off a bit, and eyeballs. But he was trying to figure out if anyone could live down there long enough to get into these suits and use the suits to get up again. And it was sort of like touch and go, and we weren't sure, so I wasn't sure if it was believable enough from where the science was. Maybe I'll pick Heather's brain. She seems the right candidate for it.
I think one aspect of also the ocean in general, or like about the scientific exploration of modern science, is what fascinates me the most is like every time we think there's areas on this planet even that we don't think there could be life in a sense, we find extremophiles, so microbial bacteria or something that can sustain volcanic activity, that can withstand sulfuric, acidic conditions. And yeah, it's always baffling to me how the drive for life can create so many different things, which I love about science, and all the weird science and the spooky science of how can in this environment something be created that survives over billions of years. And so then I often think about how much of this can be introduced in my scenarios as like little spots, little pockets of uninhabitable area that is by closer inspection something different, and kind of bring up that investigative discovery of, oh shit, there's actually something, and what it is terrifying. Because like, still for me, as a scientist even, the most terrifying things are viruses, microbes, because for us they are too small to notice, and we're basically delivered to them, and our own defense, the only defense we have is using our technology and hope that everything is right, and we only get like a certain
Heather is the only
threshold.
defense we have.
Exactly.
You're all fucked. Is the answer.
Cheers, Heather.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard
One of the images I have on this, again, I keep talking about, this is not self-promotion. There's one post on this blog, period. I have an image, it's an artist's image of a white blood cell going after some tuberculosis bacilli. And it's not the typical blobby white blood cell image. It was a really interesting image. The blood cell has all these arms coming out of it, and they're reaching for each bacillum individually. Really, just a really interesting concept, and on the thing we everybody thought they knew. This person reimagined it.
I imagine that process is called phagocytosis.
Yes, it is.
Just have
Well
to pull
done.
that out of the old memory banks.
Yeah, you're better at science than you thought, Newman.
And I can even read from the screen as well. They're wonderful images, Heather. Really, really. I think you're talking about nature as well. Obviously, you don't get to see this level of nature unless you are very much within that scientific community, firsthand anyway. But the imagery on the blog is really good. Really, awe-inspiring, fear-inspiring. I was going to say, just on, because Graeme was talking about his scenario and your scuba diver friend and the believability of it, and David, you were talking about as well about that level of, that microbiology that we don't know and exist. Just two quick things. I think as a player, I think I'm probably speaking for a rather significant proportion of players, gamers out there. I wouldn't know. So if I'm playing one of those things and there's talk about microbiology, different kind of things, survival rates and stuff, I'm not going to know those exact details, and I would be more than happy if they were slightly manipulated to suit the scenario as well, because obviously that's can be a part of what we're doing. Secondly, I started rewatching the X-Files again recently. I don't really know why. I feel like it's become more of a curse than a blessing. But there was one episode, and it was great. It was kind of what we were talking. There was one where they go randomly into the forest. Oh, that's it, because there's loads of foresters, cutting down trees and whatever. And what they did is they cut down a tree, and it had this ancient kind of microbial. Do you remember the one with all the green? All the green flies and stuff. Basically, it was supposed to be like an extinct type of insect, but microbial kind of insect. And you never saw them. All you saw was this kind of green haze and the way they talked about it. And it was actually like a brilliant episode. It was one of the ones that stood out to me. And apart from things like tombs and whatnot, it was one of the ones that stood out to me. And I went, yeah, okay, that was actually told really well. And I was thinking, wouldn't that make a great scenario because of the environment and, they can't escape because X, Y, and Z. But that was something, I think that was a good example of someone writing something where your enemy, your villain, your conflict is something that, didn't have a face, didn't have a human understandable motive, and it works really well.
So there are some really good X-Files episodes using nature horror. Can think of a few straight away. War of the Coprophages might be the one you were just talking about. That is
Quite
going
possibly.
out into a wood. Yeah, I think there were cockroaches involved. That one stuck in my head for a long time because I really hate cockroaches. There's a couple that are inspired by fungi. One of them is Firewalker. That's inspired by cordyceps fungi. I think those are quite well known now, thanks to The Last of Us.
And it happened in a really cool location, obviously. Down in the, was it a volcano?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, that plays into the extrema files again. Fungi can live in places that don't seem like places things can live.
Yeah. Good episode.
Yeah. Plus, there's that horrible image of the fungal bloom bursting out of the guy's neck.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah. And then
really stayed
trying to pop and trying to use that to then infect other people as well. It was that life cycle of the fungi, wasn't it? It was. Yeah, I remember that now. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's all based on the ant zombie cordyceps fungus, and there's some ghastly images on the internet of infected ants.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
I decided not to include in any of that. Even that even put me off. So.
And that's a line.
Yes, another X-Files episode that uses fungi is Field Trip. And in that case, it's an absolutely massive fungus. That it's just a single organism that's like covering an entire forest. Because you think of fungi, you think of the bit that you see above ground, the mushrooms, but most of an actual fungus, it's the mycelium underground.
They're huge, yeah. That's kind of what I use for fever. So where does that rate on your top 10? I mean, I'm curious.
The top 10.
Top 10 funguses?
So your top 10 fungus list?
Yeah, I do have a list. Yeah, it's obviously the one in Field Trip is fictional, but based on real stuff, so it's not on my list of real fungi. But
surely you have a fictional fungi top 10 list as well.
Yeah, ant zombie cordyceps is top of the list, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of just looking really weird, Clathurus archeri, it's also called the octopus stinkhorn or devil's fingers. And stinkhorns are pretty weird to begin with. You know it if you see it. It looks like a penis and smells like rotting meat. But the octopus stinkhorns look even weirder. To start off, they hatch out of eggs. They do look a little bit like the eggs from Alien.
Are they the one
especially
with
when they're about to hatch?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the devil's fingers.
The red sort of like tentacles that come out of
that
one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very strange. And they're all covered in black slime. And the slime serves a purpose. It's gleba. It's what their spores are kept in. And the smell is there to attract insects who come and eat the gleba and walk about in it and then transfer the spores.
Yeah.
That particular one fascinates me.
Naming the fungi in the chat, just in case anybody wanted off their own volition, wanted to look at them. Devil's fingers, the Clathurus archeri. Yeah.
The whole of the Clathurus group are really weird-looking things. They do not look like things that should exist on Earth. They look like alien life forms. So you need inspiration for something that looks weird. These are all completely natural.
Yeah.
But they look wrong.
That's why you don't eat mushrooms at all. You never know what it is.
Well, yeah.
And if you want more weird-looking ones, I'd say a bleeding tooth fungus. That's a fun one. It looks like.
So I'm going to Google this immediately.
They are wonderful. They are, and so they look a bit like a marshmallow, but one that's oozing blood.
My word! This is also known as devil's tooth. I can see why it's known as devil's tooth.
It's becoming a reaction channel.
Okay.
So that blood-like goo on the top, that is an anticoagulant. I have no idea why.
Fantastic.
There's
so much weird and wacky stuff out there in the world of fungi.
Oh, there is a much nicer name for it. You could have known. You could have called it strawberries and cream.
Oh.
I think if I saw that, the last thing I'd be thinking about is strawberries and cream, and I would be thinking about devil's teeth. I think that's a perfect name for it.
It's a bit of propaganda. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Just a reminder for the audience as well, if you have any questions that you want to bring up, please let us know as we try to bring them into the conversation. What are maybe also some, because we touched most of them, the questions that I had lined up already in different ways, but what are maybe your personal kind of favorite nature facts that you kind of learned in doing research that you were kind of not aware of, or that took you a bit by surprise?
It's a really hard question.
I did learn a little something. I'm not convinced it's a brilliant nature fact, but it's nature adjacent. If that might help. Just in terms of when I was looking at the Dartmoor prison up on the moors, and obviously I was researching the moors, but I was also researching the reason, why and who first built that prison. And it was actually it was because there was a huge influx of Napoleonic prisoners that were being brought over to be held for a number of reasons. But they were originally held on the prison barges out on the coast. But because of the nature of holding X amount of people out on these prison barges, unfortunately, the horrible conditions meant that the prisoners didn't last that long. So there was a significant consideration as to, well, we need to put them somewhere. They need to be accessible should we need them for any kind of negotiation purposes. But at the same time, we need to get them off these horrific prison barges. And I think you know, when I think of England, which is obviously, or Great Britain rather, which is only a kind of a small area on the kind of the global landscape, I know that, you know, in the evolution of London and how that's used, the rivers have always been quite a significant part of London, as rivers are always a significant part of any civilized area. But the Thames itself has a very significant history, and I think fingers crossed when we get to see the Chaosium Gaslight books that come out, hopefully in the near future, we're going to be able to see how the environment has changed and how it's used, and how I suppose the natives and the residents would interact with that environment as well. I think that's something that interests me, is kind of going back, seeing something that, I lived in London for years and crossed the Thames, at least 4 or 5 times a week for different bits and bobses. But I think seeing how historically the environment is used, even in the same location, is quite an interesting thing to think about.
One of the interesting things I learned about, Graeme, you may have come across this, when the Russians went up into space, sent one of their vehicles into orbit, long-term orbit around the planet. A fungus developed on the outside of it that they had brought inadvertently into space. And rather than being destroyed by space, the fungus thrived in this unprotected, the vacuum of space environment. And they were like, okay, do we dare bring this back? But we need to study it, but we can't stay up here forever. And it became this real sort of ethical question about what to do about it.
Yeah,
what did they do?
Thing fascinating, really. What did they do? I've never heard of that story before.
I think
it's not that research facility that's just become overgrown with fungus and is now growing over the entire island, and all the alarms are going off.
I'm not recalling exactly what happened. If they decided to scrape it off and put it in a petri dish and bring it back under, quarantine conditions, or if they decided to see if it would burn up on reentry or what. God, I don't know. I have to look that up. See what happened ultimately with that. I was just struck by this idea of this thing living somewhere where, by all rights,
it shouldn't exist.
Should have been evaporated.
We recently watched Life. Have you ever seen that film, Life, where they find an organism in space, and they set up
it's on the list
station to deal with it. Some bad choices were made in that film. That's all I'm going to say. But yeah, it's interesting. I like the idea of it a lot, and obviously they're doing research and experiments in the international station all the time. It'll be interesting once they decommission it if there's any sort of lasting effects from what these things sort of just mothball one of these experiments and forget about a petri dish somewhere, and it's just sitting there growing and growing and growing in a cupboard somewhere. It could be quite interesting to do, but yeah, Call of Cthulhu Icarus is one of these places which is vastly interesting to expand upon. That sort of near future space travel and all that sort of thing. There's Moonglow as well. If you ever played Moonglow, where they basically have the sort of moon base and things go wrong and you sort of turn up and everything's screwed up and you've got to figure out what's going on, and it's quite an interesting one as well, sort of thing. It's hard to write for because it's very hard science, I guess, but the scenarios which are there are very interesting. There's Blood Moon as well, where the moon's a massive egg, basically, and you have to go with it. It's basically it's out of print, I think, but it's basically the start of the apocalypse, sort of thing. It's very interesting too. But yeah, I think one of the things that surprised me is go back to the sea for a second. It's microbes and sea life starting to eat plastics because there's so much plastic in the ocean, and how that could really fuck up society in a lot of ways because we use plastic in a lot of ways. I remember when we had a bit of land and we wanted it. It was brown site. You can't really build on it. It's old industrial sort of complex, and we got this guy in to to clear up the sort of contamination, and he brought microbes in and says, "Yeah, they'll eat it, no problem at all." And that sort of stuck with me, sort of thing, bringing in creatures, and how when we do that normally, we bring in invasive species to deal with a different invasive species, how that always goes wrong. No matter what happens, that new invasive species starts eating the wrong damn thing.
No, it's all safe, all safe.
Yeah, it's like that always stayed with me, sort of thing. So
You got grey squirrels. Let me just get this xenomorph and we'll sort the problem out for you.
bastard squirrels.
What about you, Sue?
I'm going to talk about fungi again. So yeah, I mean, normally it's that I find something weird in nature and then start writing the scenario. But yeah, when I was writing a scenario specifically about fungi, I started looking up more fungi, and I found one called the amethyst deceiver, which is
a good name.
Yeah, it's a great name. That's what I mean. Fungus names. Some of them just look like they come out of a random word generator.
It's got hippies that find them, I think.
Yeah, it's amethyst deceivers are purple, hence that's where the name comes from. Deceiver is because they look a bit like other mushrooms apart from being purple. But yeah, they are technically edible, but you need to be really careful about eating them depending on where you've picked them, because they bioaccumulate arsenic.
You never want the word technical put toward food.
Reading the menu. Technical.
Technical.
Yeah, so if they're growing anywhere that's had like industrial waste dumps in the past, there's a real risk that they're incredibly poisonous. So
Actually,
I
Sue,
thought that really interested me, the way it's absorbing part of its own environment.
Yeah.
That's a nice thing, and Graeme, you mentioned it a second ago as well. Is looking at environmental areas that have been abused, or in parts of nature that have been abused, and then what is the result of that? I know that can be quite a common feature, but that's actually if you think about it on that smaller microbial fungi kind of level as well, that micro kind of effect, but actually is huge in scope. That's quite a nice thing to think about and look at. What was that film? Did anybody see that film? Sorry for jumping in, but there was a film. It was out recently. It was really, really good. Really enjoyed it. There was some. No, that's brilliant. I've got those books actually. I bought those years ago. San Francisco, fantastic. Jeff Vandermeer, isn't it? Brilliant books. The film was a recent one. It was about scientists. They went out into the woods and they were listening to the trees. It's going to bug me. I'm going to find it for you and I'm going to post it because
it's not a Shyamalan film, is it? Where the trees attack you by shaking.
No. It was
that film.
It was cleverer than that. No, it's a very recent film that came out. Okay, I'll be quiet and I will just post it in the chat.
There's actually a question by Scott. Thanks for watching. How might you create a Lovecraftian entity that isn't somehow influenced by creatures from the natural world? Is that even possible, based on what we discussed so far on Earth?
Yes, I think so, for sure. You'd have to go into physics, I think, instead. I think it's probably more your area, David. I was thinking about this, like hard-like entities that were like created in a lab or something like that. You could definitely go down that sort of route. It'd be quite surreal, I suppose, to do it. Maybe you've got more answers than I do for that.
I mean, light or quantum mechanics is a spooky field, and as Richard Feynman, one of the greatest quantum mechanics lecturers, said, I think it's truly safe to say that nobody truly understands quantum mechanics. Because that is the fact. It is a spooky, weird science, and I brought this fact up earlier before we started, but I think that's one of the things when I was doing a bit of research for some other scenarios and systems. I kind of dabbled back into my physics books and just got into distances and thought about neutrinos, so elements of the atom that when you split an atom are naturally released. And if you imagine a 1 light year thick sheet of lead in the universe, one light year would be about 5.8 trillion miles, or about 9 point something trillion kilometers of lead. And you shoot a neutrino from one end into this sheet of lead, there's a very high likelihood that it just passes through. which is absolute spooky science if you consider this. I mean, this is on an atomistic scale, but it is so improbable, although the masses are so significant, that in some way that's when my brain starts to kind of disconnect, because like theoretically, if you consider that with like bouncy balls or something and you throw like a pea through it, you might consider that it actually must hit, but no. These ghostly particles exist. And imagine now a creature that can be created with such elements, travel through basically everything and be unstoppable. I mean, that's a horrific idea, my aspect.
Yeah, I remember the Bose eggs where they were sort of smashing the atom to find that and all the rest of it. And everyone thought they were going to make a mini black hole and all this nonsense. That was big news back in the day.
Yeah.
So we could definitely do something like that.
The Margaret Thatcher phenomena. And yeah. Sorry, reverting back to the question of Scott, if it's possible to create a Lovecraftian entity that is not influenced by nature or natural world.
If I'm assuming Scott means by biological processes, biological creatures, I think it'd be interesting to think about what you could come up with in terms of sound. Is it possible for something to be generated by sound, for combinations of sound waves to create the right set of circumstances for something to happen? Other effects of sound waves. That would be something interesting to look at, I think.
I think there's Scott would know better than me. It's called Tenumbra or something like that. There's already something like that. I think I can't remember what it's called. It's in a story somewhere in the back of my brain. Yeah.
Maybe it'll fall out.
No, I'm terrible with names and like is the one when I forget.
I ran not too long ago Signal to Noise, which is a great scenario, and that was very much focused on signals and communication, and the horror within that was well, spoiler alert, turn off if you're planning to play it or whatnot. But there was this idea that it was communication through signals. It was an alien entity, and that was its form of language and existence. So that was a non-biological mythos creature. If that's I mean, I think there were brilliant opportunities for some body horror within it, but that was due to the effects or the actions of the entity rather than the entity being a biological creature.
So the one thing that sprung to mind from Scott's question, I think it's because he's also mentioned the colour out of space. It's something completely from the left field here, not remotely connected to horror, is the hula voos, which are from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And they are a super intelligent shade of the colour blue. And so that concept just, I find that fascinating, but I have no idea what to do with it.
Yeah, they're hard to work into things. It's like the color out of space as well. It's like there's Moonglow. It's like another sort of Call of Cthulhu Icarus scenario. That's the one I was talking about. It's like it's all about the color space that's loose on the moon, and you got to figure out what's going on. And it's incredibly hard to get the connect between the players and what's going on, because it's a very difficult entity to imagine and like translate into something being weird, because it's so intangible.
Yeah, I think the colour out of space works because it's about how it influences the natural world around it.
Yeah, for sure. It's the change of nature, basically. So
there's also dark matter. What if somebody was able to get a thermos full of dark matter? What happens then?
They rule the galaxy. Yes.
They click their thickness. Isn't I know it's all one that is always one that people go back to, but I guess that's just a comment on its success and its impact. But Event Horizon, there were biological matters, but I think the majority of that biological matter might have been the old and new crew. But the ship itself is, it's not a biological threat. And also, Scott has found the name of that film I was talking about. Classic Scott. It's called In the Earth. If you haven't seen it, immediately cancel all of your plans for the next 3 days and watch it on repeat. It's a tricky one, non-biological entity, but at the same time,
well, you could go down the route of like is it Alto, the sort of god of cars sort of thing. And there's actually a scenario. I think it's called The Great and Terrible Alto.
Yep.
It's in the Fear Sharp Little Needles, where it's all about sort of like demonic sort of machines, infernal machines, and all that sort of thing. You could definitely go down that route and do all that sort of stuff, and do the
One
sort
of the
cult.
one of the interesting things that I found, I stuck it near the end of the blog post that I have. It's about Voyager 1, because this is the opening line of this article. Billions of miles away at the edge of the solar system, Voyager 1 has gone mad and has begun to die. And that, I think that's, Star Trek, the motion picture notwithstanding, let's not even. But yeah, I mean, I think this idea of machines going mad, weird science machines going mad suddenly. There's more of a mechanism for that in Deadlands maybe than in for Pulp Cthulhu or something. But I don't know. I don't know why it couldn't happen. Why something like that couldn't just start happening in somebody's game.
And surely today, artificial intelligence has got to be in today's world, it's a significant societal concern. I think we talked about this last night, didn't we? A little bit, that it's that idea of it's there. It's there for people to kind of open the door with. I don't think it's going away.
Cats out the bag, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It's a Pandora's box one, isn't it? So it's going to be a continued concern. And arguably, it's going to be a continued concern to see which human has control over artificial intelligence, or for as long as they do, until Cyberdyne systems.
Yo-Yo Dine. We want Yo-Yo Dine to come back.
Well, imagine if machines started believing in rituals and the supernatural because they can't explain something.
That's
so it's
a
only
nice
explanation. Because it's unfathomable to describe the universe in sort of any hard limits, I guess, because no one really knows what it is. So I'm sure machines would have the same problem. So imagine if like you got a ton of machines, you throw them into space, because the way humans will probably explore space is through machines. So it's going to be 1,000 machines we're just going to throw up there, and they're going to rattle about, getting old, and as you said, like get a bit mad as well. And then we turn up with a colony ship, land on Mars, and then that Mars rover, which you thought was dead, it sort of like isn't quite dead, and it's now got a cult that it believes in some sort of
got a
mad entity. Yeah, exactly. It's they're the zealots, these mad entities.
I love that. That's great. Write that, Graeme. That's an amazing idea.
Fair.
It is, because it's a really cool twist on something that's, I know AI has been there for a long time, and if you think since in the 80s, there's probably even way before that, of course before that, there's ideas knocking around, but it's so real now, which is terrifying. And I imagine in another 10 years, people are going to go, well, 10 years ago they had no idea how real it was. Now look at us now. So yeah.
Yeah, you feel that futurism coming into play now. That like Tales of the Loop feels real now. It didn't last like 5 years ago, but now it does, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Especially if you then, on top of that, also consider that with our advancement in genome editing and like being able to now precisely manipulate genomes to the fullest extent, it becomes possible that we could go into a way that is very, very scary and very dystopian future, basically.
I think those people with all the money who are real crazy and doing whatever they want, they've got our best interests at heart, guys.
You trust them, yeah?
Absolutely.
Trust is a human endeavor, I guess.
Yeah.
No, I think one of the things that with developing technology frightens me, especially when it comes to concern of nature, is that AI or artificial intelligence, as well reliable as it is, takes aggressive action and takes over genome editing and basically uses, because we have automated labs nowadays that basically do everything based on command prompts. So like imagine an AI taking over a smart lab that then creates its own entity to solve a problem that it experiences. Well, yeah, that's that's the beginning of many fun scenarios in dystopian novels, I think.
Yeah, start to get into system shock and stuff like that here.
A couple of years ago, I have trouble with time dilation. I think it was a couple of years ago. I saw a very short article where Google had set up two AIs, these are nascent AIs, to talk to each other and to do things. They developed a language independently to communicate with each other, and Google interceded to stop them from doing it because they then became, they couldn't monitor them anymore now that they were communicating with each other.
I think I remember that being a thing.
Yeah, they killed them. Yeah, they literally killed them.
Yeah.
It's one of these things. It's like even in business, like never go into a business you don't understand because you can't control what your workers are doing. You don't know what they're doing. So we're just giving that all over to something we don't know what they're doing with it. So I think it's quite an interesting concept. How much do you trust machines?
Or how much do you trust the people who have programmed the machines? I think, because especially with large language models, that's really what you're talking about. Is how do you do the trust in the creation, and then once it's released into the wild, does it have guardrails? Because the people interacting with it certainly do not have guardrails. That's really the problem. Is that once it's out in the wild, it's exposed to humanity.
I can't remember where I seen it, but there was something about we did this and we gave over the world to AI, and they started turning people into paper clips because it was the most like sort of like best form for us to be in. There's like all these like machines that are just dedicated to turning people into paper clips. I think I can't remember what it's called. It's like it's Arthur something on YouTube. Like he describes like alien worlds all the time. He's like a physicist, and he goes on about how if we program them to be the best intention, how that best intention can be warped into an outcome you don't want, and then we're all paper clips, and that's where we live now, sort of thing.
Okay. If there are any more questions from the audience, please bring them in. Otherwise, I think we'll slowly aim to wrap up here. With maybe a bit of insight about general overview or general summary maybe of your points of what maybe is inspiring from nature for you, and what to look out for or what others should look out for, and how to utilize maybe more nature aspects in their inspirational design. Let's put it this way. So what basically just what are your summary for? Yeah, my brain is shutting down.
We know what you mean.
Yeah.
It's good they've got him. The AI's got him. I'll throw in first because I'm sure, as I always say, I'm sure you guys are going to say some wonderful things after me, and I'll just kind of rumble at the end and going, oh damn, they used words like mitochondrial, and apparently Graham's a fun guy, etc. For me, I think getting into it from a writing point of view was writing what I know, the environment that I know, the natural environment that I know, and I was able to, I think, with a sense of authority, kind of write about and then gift a keeper with that knowledge to be able to use for locations like Dartmoor or like the ocean environment that I kind of live in. I really like the idea, and I know this is what we do with a lot of things within horror, but I really like the idea of taking nature because it is by definition natural, and then screwing with it, subverting it, changing it, getting the investigators to experience it through a different sensory manners, change those senses so that you either give them something they expect with a slight difference, or it's a complete 180 of what they would expect. But I feel like this conversation has kind of inspired me to look at some really interesting things. So I think I'm going to go away and maybe think about how we can use this. And I think our conversation about AI at the end, that complete opposite to nature and the natural world, it is we all recognize just how terrifying that is. So I think those real world terrors in the absence of nature are nightmare fuel, I think is the phrase people use.
Yeah. So, Graeme, Heather?
I think what I'd say is to go and read about stuff. Find those YouTube videos on the top 5 weirdest animals, and bear in mind nature is a wide field, and so you've got animals, but then you've got insects. There's obviously I'm particularly into mycology, so all the weird, wacky world of fungi. So look at diseases, because there are some really strange ones out there. If you've ever seen a video of an animal with rabies, that is straight out of the uncanny valley. And obviously look up all the weird things that live in the sea, because they will terrify you, and then you can use them to terrify other people.
Yeah, again, go micro scale, and then take those ideas and blow them up into a massive scale. Don't worry about the physics and the biology of it. Just go with it. I mean, you're playing a pretend game, And we talked earlier a bit about life cycles. Look at the life cycle of something and see how that works. How does it ingest? How does it excrete? How does it oxidize? What are its inner processes? There's all kinds of things you can learn from any one creature. There's all kinds of things that you can use and learn and then take on as inspiration.
I like looking at failed ideas that people think were real in science and don't really pan out, and what happens if it did pan out, sort of thing. I think it was Doc yesterday was saying most of science is failure and failed ideas, sort of thing. And I like taking those failed ideas which are interesting and deciding, well, what if it was real? What if that creature, that assumption about this creature was true? And going from there. It's like, I find it very interesting, sort of thing. You can spark the imagination. You can sort of fill that gap which made it fail, and it could be something truly terrifying. Sign up to all scientific stuff, magazines and zines and emails and stuff like that, and just pick through them and keep the ones you like, and eventually you'll find a place to use them. Generally, I'd stay away from like headlines. Again, I'm not a fan of like doing the most recent thing which comes into the news, sort of thing. It's too obvious, and people tend to do that a lot. Look back in time and back to when the 40s, when people were trying to figure things out and what they tried to do and what was wrong, and that's usually where I go for inspiration.
Fantastic. Well, with that, I think there's more to say, but I want to thank everyone, the panelists, for this inspiring conversation, and maybe sorry, Newman, for the flashback to your childhood and the terrifying moments, but I feel like it's always good in such a panel to get some feelings, and yeah, you never know what comes up. Might want to use
Therapy.
it at some point. Exactly. But yeah, thank you very much, and everyone watching and the future watchers of this. The next panel will begin in an hour or so, where we kind of already set the basis for, which is science fiction and post-apocalyptic horror. So stay tuned for that, and thank you very much, everyone here from A Weekend with Good Friends. Goodbye.